I can't watch it because of that.
Oh, and there's Liam. All right, we got 4.
Yeah, Liam showed up perfectly, Liam.
Liam time.
Hey. Better than Jill and Jeremy time.
Jill's already here.
Jill's
Oh,
already
is
here.
She's
I
on
was gonna
Zoom.
do that too, but I thought I asked.
All right. We will call to order the September 30th special meeting of the Trinity County Board of Supervisors. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah, good morning.
County matters. These items include non-routine or controversial matters and are listed alphabetically by department. A member of the board or staff may request an item be heard out of order. Don't think we have any requests for that today. So we'll start County Administrative Office, item 1.1. Adopt a resolution which adopts the final budget for fiscal year 22-23.
So, good morning, Chair and board members. So staff have met with the interim director of building and planning and other staff members to make the adjustments as requested by the board members. So presented to you today is the adjusted budget for the cannabis division. So it was provided to you for review, and if you have any specific questions, we are here to respond to those.
And Letty, I just want to clarify, it's not just the adjusted cannabis budget, it's the countywide budget as a whole with the adjustments as requested to the cannabis budget.
Yep.
Yes, so it adjusted the grand total to the $139,877,023.
All right, and do any of the supervisors have any questions of staff before I open the public comment? Hearing none, we'll open the public comment on item 1.1.
Chairman Frazier, I have no raised hands, and, oh, I have a raised hand from Melissa.
All right, go ahead.
Hi, this is actually Marie Peterson, District 1. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hey, I just was looking at the budget and maybe I don't understand it fully, but it looks like 7 cannabis positions are being cut at a time when we really need people in there processing licenses. And I know those might be vacant at the moment, but the fact that all 7 of those positions were going to be cut and $0 were being taken out of the money that gets transferred to code enforcement is very concerning to me, because what happens when we have this enforcement without opportunity for licensing, and our people are suffering because now everybody's getting penalized and their money and resources are being taken and dwindling as they're waiting for licenses, but then the positions that can help issue those licenses are being removed and cut off the budget, which is just going to create and perpetuate more poverty in our county, which are already obviously struggling from a lot. We've had a lot more people going to the food bank and stuff, and I'm just really trying to understand why 0 money was taken from code enforcement and instead all of those positions were cut. And I wonder how many positions are still going to be available in the department if you guys are taking 7 of the available positions out. And that's my comment. So thank you for your time. Yeah. Oh yeah, also which position is the $224,000 that's being cut? That seems pretty concerning. I hope it's not Sean's position or something. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
I have no additional raised hands and no new chats.
All right. That, we will close public comment and bring it back to the board. motions, discussions?
Mr. Chair, before we make a motion, I would like a presentation from cannabis staff on the proposed budget.
All right.
Good morning. Interim Deputy Director Ed Presley of Building and Planning. So we took the dollar amount that we needed to reduce the budget by, and then we worked with accountants and admin staff at the county administrative office to balance out the budget. So, or you wanted me to go line by line of what was cut?
I would for the cannabis and yeah, please.
Okay. So first off, I would like to respond to what Ms. Peterson said. That was incorrect. Honestly, we defunded 4 positions. We didn't cut any positions. They're still in an allocation listing, so we could still hire those if we got funding in order to support those later on. And then I'm not really sure where the $200 and something thousand position came from.
I'll jump in and clarify that for you, I think. The $224,000 is the amount of regular salaries that is being cut for those 4 positions. It's not one position for $224,000. It's the 4 vacant positions that we are not funding at this time in the cannabis budget. Total, a regular salary of $224,000, and then there's $17,000 in Social Security, FICA, Medicare, $89,000 in PERS, $3,000 for LIUNA, $44,000 for benefits, and $1,800 for unemployment insurance that we would pay on those positions that we are not currently filling in this budget unit. So it's not one position, those are the total costs for the 4 that are not being filled. And it also includes 3 months of a code compliance specialist that was budgeted to be filled for the entire year, but wasn't filled until October.
Okay. Thank you, Susie. So account 1010, as Susie stated, we cut those, well, we defunded the vacant positions. For 2140, we reduced that by $2,000, and basically that was the cut to put in to get more in line with prior years. So a lot of the cuts that we made, instead of taking into consideration inflation or any extra costs that may be incurred over the year, what we did was basically just align them with what had been spent last year. So that could result in some issues later on, but to balance it out, we had to take everything into consideration. The bigger points, when you get down to 2300, I don't know if you actually want me to name stuff, but we had 45,000 attributed to specific CEQA lawyer. We reduced that down to 20,000. For our consultants, we reduced that amount from 450,000 down to 300,000, so we cut 150,000 of the consultants that would be doing the CEQA actions and helping us out through that. And then jumping to 2399, we reduced the environmental health portion from 125,000 down to 50,000. From code enforcement, we cut from 677,000, we cut 73,000 of that. From county council, we cut from 520,000 down to 430,000. From general counsel, we cut from 28,000 down to 10,000.
And that one's actually for IT, that cut.
Oh, IT, yes, my bad. 28,000 down to 10,000. That's true, thank you, Susie. And thanks for following along to make sure that I don't misstep here. For building and grounds, we cut $100,000.
No, that last 100,000, sorry, is just, we didn't cut from building and grounds. The last 100,000 is kind of just a blanket cut to the overall interfund professional and specialized that we're gonna watch to get us to be more in line with prior year actuals. So we're gonna watch those services, those interfund services that we're requesting, and we're gonna watch them and just kind of keep a close eyes on them and keep a close eye on the requests that we have for interfund professional. Sorry.
Nope, that's good, thank you. These notes were made several days ago, so I'm trying to interpret as I go here. So dropping down to 2750, we cut the training budget from 10,000 down to 2,000. And we dropped off the 2 vehicles that we were going to purchase for cannabis. So that drastically reduced that, but that will mean we'll have to rent them on a daily basis, but that's a lot cheaper than buying them outright. For $27.99, the fuel, we cut from 10,000 down to 5,000. And then mileage on the vehicles that we have, we basically cut their mileages down. So the total amount from the vehicle budget cut was $72,500. And then we're not going to do the HVAC upgrade. Last year they had to plug in space heaters in the planning and cannabis building. And so we wanted to earmark $50,000 to update the entire building HVAC system. And so we're not going to do that either. And essentially that's about all the cuts that I have notes on. I don't know if Susie has any more that maybe I missed, but that was all on my notes that I took.
Nope, I think you covered those.
So the cuts, the $150,000 in the CEQA consultants, of course, we need those we need the CEQAs to be put through. How are we using our own people to make up for that loss?
Well, that's what we're going to have to do, and I think that was overall the general plan to begin with, was to be able to use them to get over the hump, get our environmental compliance people up to snuff so they know exactly what we're looking for in the processing of the Appendix Cs, and then they would eventually take over for the consultants, so the consultants would actually finish up and be done. I just came out of a meeting with the consultants and I relayed to them that their cap would be cut for this year, and so Drew, which is the reason why he's not here, he's actually working through a streamlining of their efforts with what we talked about yesterday at the ad hoc, as far as getting, we need some specific items moved around that the consultants are dealing with now that necessarily they wouldn't have to deal with, that we can deal with in-house, because all of that was based on when we only had 2 staff members in the whole cannabis division. Now, as everybody has had these last 3-4 months to kind of get trained up and know exactly what they need to be doing, we're able to cut back on just like the county council portion of it, we're able to cut back on some of the requirements placed on them so that they can focus. And my last directive to them before I got off the call, before coming over, was that they are 100% focused on Appendix C review, and all this other stuff, we need to find a way to streamline it. And that's kind of some of the stuff we talked about yesterday at the ad hoc as well, as far as incomplete memos going over to county council. We have staff now in the office and we can't handle that in the office. The Appendix C reviews, once we get that second incomplete letter, maybe we pull those back into the office and we use those, we use our staff in the office to complete those reviews instead of continuing to send it back to the consultants who would not necessarily prioritize that to the very top. It's just process streamlining like that we're looking at with them. We didn't want to cut anything, but we had a choice.
We want to give some sort of comfort level to people out there that we're trying to get their license, that this is not a planned slow process.
100% not. It's all about streamlining, and really it's updating our processes that were put in place months ago that now we have staff and we're able to take care of those processes in-house.
So what about the income side of this? We cut roughly $1 million, but we're bringing more of the grant money in.
Yes.
So how much more of the grant money are we going to use this year?
We're actually not bringing any more of the grant money in than the budget that was presented to you at budget hearings, but we are anticipating to use about 1.4 million from the grant.
So that's going to leave us a balance of like 600,000, something like that? These 600,
I thought that was exactly the number, actually.
I think-
we came up with.
Yeah, I think so, because we used about 600 in
650 before.
In the staffing.
the prior year, and then we'll use about 1.4, and so we'll have about 600,000 next year. With the goal being that, and I apologize if I'm speaking out of turn for you,
No, it's fine.
but I believe the goal is that we're using a little bit more of that grant this year to help get us to a point where we're getting those licenses out, so then we have the revenue coming in from those licenses, and we don't need as much from the grant in the future year.
So in my rough figuring, that we're going to have at least for 23, 24, we're going to have at least 300 licenses up and running and paying theirs. Plus, we're going to have an updated fee study within that to see if that's still adequate, just for targets and for people's knowledge. And that might be a little low. We might need to have more than that.
Yeah, I think those were the rough numbers that we kind of came up with in the office when we were working through this.
Right, and the fee study's ongoing right now.
Okay.
Yes, so that was being worked out a little bit yesterday as well. And we plan to present that fee study along with other fee studies for the building and planning department as a whole, working with Craig Goodman to be able to get that, so everything kind of is in lockstep. Because, you know, what happens in cannabis doesn't necessarily just stay in cannabis, it bleeds over into building department, planning department, so environmental health, everybody is kind of involved in that process as well. So we want to make sure all the fees are accurate, and a lot of them haven't been updated in more than a decade. So that's really what we're looking at, and that should be brought forward to the board in November.
Okay. All right, I want to thank you guys for, I screwed it over.
Thank you.
I wanted to thank you guys for going back and doing the hard work to make this balance a little more realistic and to set so everybody in the county and the industry understands where they're at and how things are going to need to go. So thank you, I'm done.
All right, Supervisor Cox had a hand up, so do you have a question, Jill?
I do, thanks. You had mentioned that there was going to be $10,000 that had originally been set aside for training, and now it's $2,000. And I'm wondering, is that training that would have been specific to the positions that we now are not going to hire immediately, or are we taking training away from people who were there and are going to need that? I just don't want things to slow down or become less streamlined than they could be if you have those dollars, you can find those dollars for people.
Right, I think if I understood your question correctly, is the 10,000 that we had allocated for training being cut down to 2, is that going to interfere with current ongoing? And no, it's not, and it is to take in consideration all the new hires. So what we want to do is have the training take place in-house instead of having to send it out to Sacramento or Humboldt or other places. Susie, did you have anything to add to that? No, it's basically just in-house training that we're looking at. And we like being able to be part of different groups. So we would have to send people to Humboldt or to Mendocino County for, you know, just different regional type or state level trainings. And so we would really like to get that mostly in-house, but whatever we can budget, and when we can get those folks out to regional or state level trainings, then, you know, it just helps. It's kind of a public relations thing so that we all stay on the same sheet of music. I know Zoom has kind of taken over a lot of that in very recent years, but it's kind of a face-to-face thing with a lot of these different meetings and trainings that go on.
Okay, so to be clear, I'm asking if 2,000 is enough. I'm not questioning the 2. Do you need 10 in order to be fully supported, because that's the goal?
I think in the way we had to streamline the budget this year, I think we just have to make do with what we have, and so 2,000 would be enough, ma'am, yes.
Okay.
Supervisor Brown, you have a question?
Yeah, if you can explain a little bit more, how the grant money that pays for the consultants, by diminishing that, how that's, helping the budget. I just don't understand how lowering the consultants' contribution, unless it's not entirely all paid for by the state grant. Can you expand on that, please?
Yes, sure. Everybody should be aware of this, but the crux of this whole discussion and argument is the fact that we had taken too much out of the grant funds. So we were allocated a certain amount per year, and we were supposed to be following those specific guidelines. And I think it was right around $1 million per year, and we weren't really supposed to exceed that. And I think with the front loading of everything, really with the downside of coming out of the TAA lawsuit and then trying to figure out how to get all these licenses CEQA compliant, we kind of front loaded all that thinking that we had this grant that was 2.6 million up to 3.2 million, and we just wanted to do as much as we possibly could in the time frame, in the shortest amount of time frame, to not miss another season. So what we actually did with the budget is we pushed a little bit more of that forward so we would have it later instead of having so much right at this time. So I don't think it's going to streamline what's going on to push that money forward and not utilize it right now. I think if you have 10 people working and all of a sudden you have 6 people working, I don't think that, that is necessarily going to be the most effective way to do it. But I think in following the grant guidelines, that was what we needed to do to come back a little bit more in the realm of what we should have been doing to begin with.
Jeremy, this is Keith. The issue is not that we're cutting consultants, but it's taking that money and paying our employees. And so since previously the consultants, we had very few employees, and now we we hired employees that we're transferring. It's not that we're spending less of that grant money, we're actually spending more, but we're transferring it from them to our employees that will be doing that work, if that.
Okay, thank you, yeah, that makes sense, appreciate it.
Yeah, right, sir. If you remember, we had 2 employees 6 months ago, and now we have 10. So, yes. I mean, I would still like to keep the consultants at that amount so we keep maximum effort on their part, but, just for our balancing purposes, that's just what we needed to do.
Okay, and of that, and maybe it's too off topic, but of the 2.6 or 3.2 for that grant money, do you know what the total expenditure has been so far?
The last year budget is, I'm going to use real round numbers, was around 650,000. And so then you're predicting 1.4 million, which would leave us with the 600,000, and then there's the last 20% that comes. There is some dispute as of yesterday when that can come, we believe that's 24, that comes in the last 20%.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Any questions on any portion of our budget besides cannabis? All right. Anyone care to make a motion?
I would move to adopt the budget as presented today.
We have a motion.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none.
Okay. Supervisor Brown?
Aye.
Supervisor Groves?
Aye.
Supervisor Cox?
Aye.
Supervisor Gokin?
Aye.
Chairman Frazier?
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to item 1.2, clerk of the board conduct a strategic planning session to discuss and/or provide direction on the following: final review of the county strategic plan, confirmation of priorities, plan implementation systems, county implementation system, no fiscal impact.
Good morning. We have been working with our consultant, Mr. Jim Delizia, on our strategic plan. This is a project that was started before I came into this position. So Mr. Delizia, it will be on Zoom to do a presentation on the development of the strategic plan.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you again. Let me bring us up to date. Since the last time we met as a full group, a number of things have been worked on to bring the plan draft to where it is today for your final review. Since we met, we had several staff working groups along with some BOS representation on those groups to take a look at the deliverables and continue to work them and refine them. And they really had a particular point of view in looking at these deliverables. One, being sensitive to work that was already underway in the county. Two, really a critical look at what work really falls under the purview of the county and what is outside of the purview of the county, or work that the county could influence related to the issues in the plan. Work that certainly would be challenging, but with a sense of feasibility to accomplish within the scope of the plan. And then there were certain deliverables where the sequence was important. Certain things had to be done to build a foundation for other things to be done. So the work groups really rolled up their sleeves and took the deliverables that we had all come up with and really did some great work at defining those and sequencing those, and really adding some additional thoughts from a staff and BOS perspective. Once that was done, then Letty put together what we were calling a core group, made up of about 5 or 6 senior staff and BOS representation as well, to take the results of the work groups work and continue to refine it. And just clean it up and present it in the form that you see it. And then the very final step was we did a survey of the BOS members, asking you to do some hard prioritizing of the deliverables, both from the perspective of putting the deliverables in order of priority under each issue, but then also looking across the entire plan and coming up with a short list of critical priorities to focus attention and resources on in the first year of the plan. And you'll see those summarized at the very end of the document. So in our final session today, and I can't believe I'm saying final, but in our final session today, we need to do a couple of things as Dan mentioned. One, final opportunity for any comments on the strategic plan, and also to confirm the priorities. That would be important. And then to talk about what happens now that you've got a plan, once it's approved, obviously. What happens now? How do you implement it so that it drives focus and action? It's a useful management and governance tool, and it stays fresh and updated. So that's an important system to think through to ultimately have this plan be successful and responsive to your constituents. So those are the two things we want to talk about today. So with your permission, I will put up the plan document on the screen, and we can see if there's any additional comments on this, what I'm calling a review draft, and in particular confirm the priorities as you see them here in the document and at the end of the document as well. So at this point, Mr. Chairman, I'll ask if there's any additional comments on the plan text, and then we should absolutely confirm the priorities, that people feel good about that short list of priorities.
Right. Does anyone have any Anything they'd like to bring up right now before we get into the priorities? All right, seeing none.
Okay. And go to the last page here. So I summarized the results of the survey here, and I sort of categorized them as first-tier deliverables and second-tier deliverables. You know, mainly as a result of just the number of votes. First-tier deliverables got four or five votes as critical priorities to tackle in the first year. Second-tier deliverables fell just under that. And so, just to recap these very quickly, top-tier deliverables for 2023 in this plan will make intimate sense to you, considering our discussion about important issues all along in this process. First one was to obviously continue the good work and the important work of updating the general plan. And I put in parentheses sort of the issue where these deliverables came from so you can get a sense of the focus here. The second was to form a county economic development team to investigate opportunities to leverage county assets and to recommend priorities. And as part of that was to determine the cost of including a feasibility study as part of the general plan in this area. And that came under the small business development issue. The third, based on your conversation, related to your conversation just now, continue to make progress issuing secret compliant annual licenses. And the fourth top-tier deliverable was to discuss the USFS Good Neighbor Authority and the impact of communication with the forest supervisor on forest management policy and priority in Washington. These were followed very closely by about a half a dozen sort of second-tier priorities as resources become available in the first year of the plan. And those are, one, to conduct an initial public meeting with all stakeholders regarding the development and implementation of broadband in the county, just to get everybody on the same page, what's the current status of efforts underway, and to discuss current and desired parameters for the power grid, just making sure that all stakeholders who are involved in this important issue have a chance to share a common vision here and a sense of what's going on. The second was to develop a strategy and a process to achieve sufficient levels of code enforcement, including and beyond cannabis. Third was to develop a public outreach strategy to regularly share county accomplishments and challenges, facilitate dialogue and raise awareness, and understanding a strong sense of community within the county. And we talked about some ideas about public forums or working with various sectors in the community to make sure the communication is flowing both ways on a regular basis. Number four was to capture additional revenue from Airbnb and VRBO, property registrations. Number five was to support the creation of the Natural Resources Department, building on the current position in the Planning Department. That's working closely with the Fire Service to build these relationships. Six was clarify roles and accountability in the process of communication and reporting between the BOS department heads. We'll talk a little bit about this in the implementation system in a minute. Next was conduct a fee study, which obviously it seems like it's underway, which is great. And the final was to increase collections. So that is what came out of across the plan look from the BOS comments on priorities. So we should probably validate these and have any discussions on these because obviously they'll form the basis of the work going forward, at least in the short term from this plan. So Dan, I'd ask if there's any comments or alterations to the priority list.
Hi Jim, this is Keith. Sorry, Dan. So on the top second tier deliverables, in quote, desired parameters for power grid, what does that mean?
We talked about, and others weigh in as well, we talked about obviously the county's role and ability to not control that per se as a third-party provider, but to have influence perhaps over desired expectations and performance of the power grid. And so it was sort of tacked on to talking about broadband, but also sharing sort of what's happening in a general utility and infrastructure sense and to be able to express what the hopes are for that asset within the county. And others can certainly clarify that, but that is my sense of that deliverable in the conversation.
Does that answer your question?
Well, it answers my question. I don't, you have a government entity that has more gross revenue to spend than the county does managing. I'm just not sure where the role of the counties is in that.
Right.
I believe from our work groups that we had discussions surrounding the issues about improving our communications, and of course broadband was part of that. For example, most recently I've had several conversations on the need of increased amount of cell towers just to improve our emergency communications with our emergency responders. So it's in that area of discussion that came up.
I don't disagree with all of that, but we specifically say parameters for the power grid, not the communication grid or the other thing, anything else. We specify power.
The discussion there was to do with the, and I just can't say it, the CCA, right? The
CCA, yeah.
So that was the discussion, I think, really was to do with power. Were we going to continue on that? You know, Jeremy was really spearheading that. And I think that was the conversation we were having when we put this into the document. Letty, do you agree?
Yes, we've had a few conversations about that. So if it's the actual wording of it, we could rephrase it to a different way, in a different way.
You just might want to separate it into two different, one being broadband and one being power grid, or or just the community choice aggregate.
Thanks.
So the CCA was referenced elsewhere in the document.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we have two choices. We can relanguage this to make it clearer what the county's involvement in this is, or we can consider it covered elsewhere in the document. What's your choice?
Well, to me, I think it's covered elsewhere in the document, but if that wasn't obvious to Keith, then that might not be obvious to other people as well. Mm-hmm. And so it might lend that clarity, and any place we can eliminate confusion, I think is helpful if that's easy to do.
Yeah, we could simply put a period after underway and strike the rest of that.
I agree. Yeah, the board does.
I think that would be helpful. Keith, do you think that would be?
Yeah, no, that's fine. And Jim, you stopped sharing. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, I think somebody stopped sharing for me. Should I reshare? Okay.
Because we were more, I stopped your screen sharing because we were more in discussion, and
got it.
Everybody else on Zoom and in the video world, and they can see us because we weren't specifically going over sections in the document. We're having more discussion. So as discussion happens, I will stop the screen share unless we're talking to a specific piece of that.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so you can see I striked that there. Any other comments on the deliverables? I mean, the priorities?
Yes, in the last line there on increased collections, you have two asterisks there in fiscal capacity. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, originally, and this is, the two asterisks are there just because it was a second tier deliverable. And Lenny, you can help me out on this one too. Originally, I believe it said reinstitute or reinstate the collections department. And in talking with Letty, I said, that may be the case, but there are other ways to increase collections without necessarily doing that. And so it seemed more logical to put as a deliverable increasing collections rather than pinholing the choice to have a collections department. There may be other ways that you could do that. The goal was to increase collections. And so that's why you may not recognize that necessarily, but it used to say reinstitute or reinstate the collections department. Letty, any further illumination on that?
Yes, I wanted to remove the collections department because, again, that's something that we would have to discuss internally as far as the structure of any department that would take that on. So I just would prefer to say increase collections because it has been in my discovery in this role that, we have been deficient in following up on collections, and I would recommend it be a deliverable to increase our revenue collections.
I would just recommend, and again, it's probably in the backup, I can't recall, that increase unrecognized collections or uncollected collections because because increase, to me, that could be used in a broader sense, like raising taxes or.
No, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have a lot of people who were paying that just stopped paying, and so it wouldn't be an increase in taxes. We don't want anybody to think it would be, but to go back and put pressure, we'll say, on the people who stopped paying to engage and continue to pay their fines. It seemed like they just stopped and nothing happened to them, and they just, I'm not sure the number, but I think it's in the millions of dollars.
It is.
And we are starting efforts to outsource an agency possibly to assist with that. So again, it's just a deliverable that I would encourage to look at.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I agree with what Liam's saying. I just don't know if just saying increase collections is clear.
Right.
That we want to make an effort to increase collections that people owe us money.
Maybe
I
define
think
it
that if you
Yeah.
said something along the lines of increased collections of
Fines.
outstanding accounts,
There
Or
you go.
something along those lines might be a little, I think that's what you're trying to get at, Keith?
No, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I think
some
it
people like it where
descriptive.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim.
Yep, outstanding accounts. Got
Yes,
it.
there you
that's
go.
perfect.
There we go.
Adjudicated everything, so we don't have to go through any of
Thank you,
those
Susie.
dollars
Yeah.
spent. We're just looking for payment.
Yes.
Thank you, Susan.
Excellent.
You're welcome.
All right, any other?
If that's sufficient, that's great, but I'm just wondering if, maybe I'm being, like, I like the world perfect, and I have to learn that it isn't. But when we just want to increase it, is there a way to say it that we would like it to be how it ought to be? If you owe a fine, you pay your fine. So to just say we just want to increase it, we want to find some way to streamline the process that if there is a fine that's out there, that it gets collected. Not just that we, and I get, it's going to be a process to get to the goal, but I don't know.
Well, you could be very simple about it and just say collect outstanding accounts.
Just get it done. Okay.
You can maximize efforts for collections. It's maximizing the ability to collect. It's not increasing necessarily the ambition of putting out more collections. That's my understanding, is that there's plenty of collections out there. It's just our ability to actually collect on them in an efficient way that actually doesn't cost us money in the staffing of those efforts.
Right, and I think that in Supervisor Brown's statement there, he brings up an important point that I was kind of wondering about. This isn't to do with, we're going to go out and figure out more ways to, find errors among people. This is just, the errors were there, the fines exist, they need to be collected upon and not ignored.
Good. Okay.
Everybody all right with that language?
Jill, can you see what they wrote?
Not.
Maximize ability to collect outstanding accounts. So whether that's streamlining a process or just being a more effective strategy, as Letty was saying, using outside agencies, whatever that is, you're enhancing your own ability to do that and collect those outstanding accounts.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Anything else? All right, I think we.
I've been struggling with this one, and I want to ask Letty's view. The third from the bottom, clarify roles, accountability, and the process of communication and reporting between the BOS and the department heads. As a CAO, that really is kind of your job or a CAO's job.
Yeah, I don't remember when that was added or,
Yeah, I can.
but I agree.
Can
I agree.
Go
Go
if
ahead,
you
Jim.
want to lend some clarity, I think there was a conversation, particularly among the staff working groups, of just clarity of expectations of what is our reporting responsibilities, from the BOS's point of view, what level of information or detail should be communicated on an ongoing basis. What is that chain? What is that reporting process so that everybody feels comfortable that we know what's going on and we have the information we need to make decisions? I will say, if you hold the thought on this, what we're going to talk about next as part of the implementation system, what is the monitoring reporting process? Who's involved in that and how often might lend some clarity behind this priority. But generally speaking, it was there because both internally between departments, but also between departments and the BOS, there was a need to kind of think about and talk about what is the right model of communication to use so that everybody is aware and has great understanding, but has the information to make good decisions as well. But we will talk about this a little more.
And I think a lot of that came from, prior to Letty being here when this initially started, I felt like we didn't have a clear way to get through to the department heads as a board through our previous CAO. And then this came up, and that was one of the things that I would like to have more of, and I think now with the changing of CAOs, we've almost kind of naturally fallen into a way of communicating that turns out to be really, efficient, easy, and I think for me it's working great. I mean, the communication that we have now, I've only been a supervisor for a couple of years or less, but it's certainly the best that I've seen since I've been on the board. So hopefully it can continue that way in just kind of a natural progression between the CAO, the board, and the department heads.
I would jump in and say that there are several places. I love this document, by the way, Jim. I got to tell you, I was excited reading it because it's so clear and streamlined. But there's a few places in here where I identified that, this item right here would fall to the CAO, or this item would fall to a CAO and a board member and somebody from the outside. So right. The fact that Keith has identified that, this bullet point for sure, this one falls on the CAO, I don't think that's reason to take it out. And just because it is working well now, I don't think is another reason to take it out. We want to make sure that that stays working well going forward, and having it in here as a deliverable, maybe that's what, again, just because it's working well now, we have an interim CAO. So we want to make sure that when we transition, that continues to work well. And I think leaving it as a deliverable is important, so we make sure that box stays checked.
Yeah. And again, you're going to look at this one from two perspectives. One, in a minute, you're going to talk about part of the implementation process is to kind of confirm a lead and a support role on each of these priorities. And so clearly the lead here would be Letty and maybe a BOS member. And so documenting that is something you are going to do in a moment. But also, it falls into the step of the monitoring and reporting process. You want to make sure, and maybe it's clear to you all, but you want to make sure that department heads have a good sense too of their reporting accountability, and frankly, information and insight they're going to be able to expect from the board on direction and guidance as well. So it works both ways. And so I think when you think about the monitoring and reporting part of this strategic planning process, you'll come back to this again. So as I say, I think by the end of the conversation today, you'll have much greater clarity over that deliverable.
So, yeah, I'm fine with leaving it in. The fact that this is driven by the department heads actually is kind of sad. That if the department heads don't know how this process is working, then obviously we have a failure someplace, and so clarifying that is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm done with this page.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Is everyone else good?
Sure, thank you.
All right. I think we have some consensus there.
Okay, I will definitely make these changes for you and get you a final document for your approval. Okay, ready to move on? Any need, Mr. Chair, to ask for any other comment? Again, that's just totally up to you. We're about to get into sort of the implementation logistics. Any need to pause for any other comment? Public comment or any other?
I think we can go ahead through that and then.
All right. Thank you. Perfect. All right, so now that the plan development is solidified, there's not as fun and not as exciting, but an equally important phase of this work, and that is building a plan implementation system that will make sure that the decisions you've made in this plan document will drive focus and work and resources of the county, so that this plan can become a really effective governance tool for the board and an effective management tool for the CAO and the staff. So it is really important, and as I think I mentioned to you early on, this is where a lot of organizations kind of drop the ball a bit, and what happens is that the plan then really doesn't live as an effective tool for governance and management as it could be. So whereas these are not the most exciting pieces, they will make the machine work and the decision-making process work very well if you build this ongoing way to implement the plan. So let me throw up a couple of slides to kind of get us started on this. I did give you sort of a one-page narrative on what this process looks like, but let me do a couple of foundation pieces before we get into that. So there are a couple of agreements that are important to have before you design a plan implementation system that you're going to use year in and year out into the future. And these should be no surprise to you, but really a foundation for this system, number one, is clarity of roles, because the board and the staff and the CAO will all have important roles to play in this process, and so there really needs to be clarity of roles and a strong partnership between those three groups in implementing this plan. And number two is agreement on the outcomes and the priorities for the planning cycle that you're striving for. Well, we've just pinpointed those, so you've got those in your milestones and priorities. And then a system and tools in place to kind of manage plan implementation, and that's what we're going to talk about in a minute. So the first one, I thought, it's important not to gloss over the first one. You all probably instinctively know this. There may be no issues here at all, but it is an important part of making sure that the process works well. And so I took the liberty on this first bullet to take a stab at what this county leadership partnership concept, if you will, looks like at a very high level. What are some of the board's accountabilities, the CAO's accountabilities, and the department head's accountabilities? So I'd like us to look at this list, and if there's anything that needs to shift, then it's important that we agree. This is one of the agreements that forms the building block of the plan implementation system. So on the board side, at a very high level, obviously you represent your constituents' needs and perspectives, oversight of the CAO. You have a governance function, which includes planning and budgeting and policy. You're setting direction and priorities, which obviously you've just done a big piece of that. And external relations is an important function of the board as well. On the CEO side, obviously county administration, staff oversight, direction and support, accountability to and support of the board, and the development of internal operating plans and the management of those resources based on the decisions made by the board. And then department heads, program and service development and administration, accountability to and support of the CAO, and program planning and managing resources at that level. So again, this is pretty high level, but it's important that there at least be a shared agreement that these are the major roles that these partners play, because they'll come very quickly into a level of importance when we look at how the plan will be implemented and reported on, et cetera. So I would stop here and say, does this sound appropriate? Is there anything here that seems off to you before we move much further?
Anyone have any questions or comments on this page?
No, I think that's very clear and concise. I think that's it.
All right, I think
Well, the one other piece under the Board of Supervisors, just in terms of onboarding 2 new supervisors who may not be aware and need to, we do 2 things. We hire and have oversight of the CAO, but we are also responsible for the hiring of county counsel. And those are the only 2 positions that we hire.
Right.
And so we might want to just add that one bullet so we're clear that, you know, we don't hire any other.
Excellent. I'm taking notes, I will make those changes, Jill, that's excellent, a lot clearer. And could be obviously, but not that that's something you want to always be doing, it's hopefully a once in a long while action, but it is arguably, when I look at a board's role, you obviously have a lot of important roles, but the hiring of the CAO, and in your case county counsel as well, is probably the most important thing that you do as a board, because it's that partnership and that incredible competency that you rely on internally that is so critical to your work. So yeah, we need to be clear about that.
Saying what you do, you're also saying what you don't do. And that's
yes. And we will get into some, when you think about monitoring and reporting process and what information the board needs, there's a comfort level there that has to be struck at the right level, because if the board is uncomfortable that they're not getting all the information they need to make good decisions, the board is going to start to micromanage. It just happens, right? So when we get to that point, it'd be really important to kind of set that part of the process very clearly so that you're comfortable that you have awareness and understanding what's going on and you have the information you need to make good decisions. All right, I will definitely fix that. Any other comments on any of the rest of the list? Okay. Anything else? All right. Good. So then the other piece that I wanted to share with you is, so what does this plan implementation system look like? And I use the word system very purposefully. It's an ongoing month in, year in, out system that you agree to how the decisions you make in the plan are going to be implemented, how they're going to be assigned and delegated, how they're going to be monitored and measured and reported on, and how you're going to keep this plan fresh and updated based on obviously the environment and the needs of your constituents change all the time. So this is, and it's very cyclical. This is something operating in the background all the time. And again, very important to pin down elements of each of these components so that you know how this works and you're very comfortable with how the plan works and is used. So these are all the elements that we'll touch on each of these and get any comments or thoughts you have on each of these. I'll sort of explain what's involved in each of these, and then we can have any discussion that you'd like, and then I'll clean this up and get it back to you, so that honestly what I would suggest is that the implementation system is approved. As in addition to approving the plan, you approve the implementation system, because then you're very comfortable how this is going to work in that phase. So So what I did, I'll put this down right now. What I did for this, and hopefully this will be helpful, is just created a set of very simple worksheets to help us kind of walk through this conversation, and I can take any notes from the conversation, or you can ask any questions or have thoughts based on this. So what I'm referring to now is worksheets number 1 through 3. I'll put that on the screen as well. Okay. So the first component of this plan implementation system, obviously, and even before you approve the plan, you need to look at the priorities that you've defined and take a look at the resources that will be needed to actually implement those priorities, and do sort of a check on that before you say, okay, here's our dozen priorities, let's go. Let's just step back for a minute and look at whether it's staff capacity, board capacity, outside expertise needed, whether it's financial resources. Some of these call for changes in systems and infrastructure, which is also a resource. Databases, technology, procedures, those are all resources. So the resource assessment piece is a good thing to do before you launch full-blown into saying these are our priorities and what success looks like in the first year. And then obviously I combined it with identifying a lead accountability, whether that's a BOS member, a department or a staff member, or joint or other. And then secondary accountability, because some of these deliverables, which I really like about them, you know, the strategic plan is not organized by department, right? It's organized by strategic issue, which will often cut across departments. It will require multiple players to come together to get some of this done. And that's a positive thing, because it facilitates collaboration and communication within the organization also. So secondary accountability could be really important. It could be needing support from multiple departments or needing other resources to support the effort. So some considerations here when you're looking at this step. As I said, consider all forms of resources that may be required. Some of it may not be immediately obvious, but infrastructure and systems is a resource. Consider current capacity, certainly, and where you might have opportunities to add resources or realign resources or import resources. I mean, you may find there's a grant opportunity out there that can support something, or state funding, or a partnership, or some other sort of outside import of resources. So don't just look at current capacity, but look at where there's opportunities perhaps to add or realign resources. And then, as I said, it's important to have a lead accountability and then think about who else or what else needs to support or be involved in this to have this be successful. And again, the side benefit of having really good coordination and communication internally between departments, which again, the staff talked about, you know, how they could be a lot better than that, you know, in that arena. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to think about where departments can work together as needed. So that is basically a sort of a recap of this step. We can do sort of an example if you want. We can take one of your priorities and try to fill this out so you get a sense of sort of what needs to be done at this step. If you want to do that, let me go back to the priority list. Why don't we just take the second one on the first tier priority? So form a county economic, I could type development team, etc., to investigate opportunities that leverage county assets and to recommend priorities. So if you looked at that plan priority, and again, I know this is just off the cuff, but what kind of resources might that take to be successful in accomplishing in the first year of this plan? What kinds of resources would it take to form a county economic development team to investigate opportunities that leverage this county's assets and recommend priorities?
I'll go ahead. This is Jeremy. it's gonna take obviously the money to either hire staff to do it, because I don't think we have staff that can actually do that. So it would either be a third party doing an analysis of what it would take for us to have an economic development department or staff. And then the other side would be, having, an economic development plan done by a third-party contractor as a short term until we could devise a way to fund an actual full-time position.
Okay. Okay.
So Jim, I wanted to ask you, as we go down this list theoretically, is number 1 weighted heavier than number 10 by any degree?
No, I just did it first tier, second tier, and it was simply a matter of the number of votes that each of these predictables got. So no, I purposely didn't number them because it is not that at all.
How fluid can this be in kind of in the landscape that we're playing in now? And it's kind of a fluid landscape. How fluid can this priority plan be?
Yeah.
If things come up, I don't know, we'll just say the jail opens in January, there may be things that
exactly
we need to take on at that point that are become higher than
exactly
1 through 4 perhaps. So how fluid can this be?
It needs to be fluid. You need to set out with a plan, and we all know the best laid plans. But that's why you're going to have a way to determine how often you want to monitor or consider this plan throughout the year, because new opportunities will come up and the board will have a discussion. Like the window on this opportunity is only open for so long, and we believe it's more of a priority. Let's divert attention or resources. It needs to be very fluid, although you also need a plan to say, okay, we've had this great discussion. This is our plan going forward, but we need to be open to the fact that we may want to switch things around or put something new on the list that will bump something else out. It needs to be fluid. Your environment is not static. So that's why you can't only touch this once a year. You have to touch it multiple times so you have the flexibility to make the decisions you need to make.
Thank you.
Great question. All right, I'm sure that there may be other resources here, but when you look at a priority such as this, what would you say would be a lead accountability on this? Is it a joint board department accountability? Is it a lead staff department or CAO accountability? What would you say is the lead accountability on this?
Staff. Department or CAO staff, in my view.
I would say CAO and the HR director on creating positions and and also the CAO would be working with outsourcing, finding a contractor if that's what the board desires.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree. As a board member, I don't think we should be micromanaging a lot. So I would defer to the CAO to bring this to us.
And Jim, this tool is really helpful in respects to, the role of the CAO is definitely to support the board's desires and, objectives. So knowing what their priority is among the other things that are on the plate of the CAO, this really helps put a focus on what they would like to be a priority among the other things that we come across.
I'll tell you, we can certainly continue on with this, but I just wanted to give you a taste because it does raise these opportunities. But what's going to happen here, an important point about this stage of the process, once you've really thought through these dozen priorities and you've really thought about resource assessment, lead, accountability, all the capacity issues, this 99.9% of the time taken as a whole, you will realize that even though the list has the top tier list has 4 priorities and the second tier list has maybe 7 or 8, it's still a lot considering the other actions and operations and priorities that you've got to carry on with as a county. Inevitably what happens through this exercise, and that's why it's good to do it before you approve the ultimate plan for the year, is that it forces you potentially to go back and adjust. My sense is once you get through the 12, you're going to say, this is challenging, but maybe it's a bit too challenging for our current capacity, whether it's financial or staff or just time in general, or we don't have the infrastructure in place to do some of these things, and that really has to happen first. You will ultimately go back and probably adjust the list of priorities. And that's the value of this as well. And Letty, you've just now started to hint at that. So I would absolutely go through this, really see what it's going to take to implement these priorities, and then go back and adjust lightly your list so that you've got a challenging yet feasible plan in the first year.
You know, it's also, Jim, in my opinion, a really good performance measure on the CAO's role, because, you know, I've had several conversations with different board members on different things that they had hoped would have, that this position would work on. So again, it's a good performance measuring tool.
Well, as you say, clarity. I mean, you could view your role as everything's important, and I've got to do it all, and I, somebody like you, I imagine that you kind of feel that a lot. This really does help streamline what the board thinks is most critical, and as was said, you can refresh this every quarter because something may pop up that needs to take precedent, and if you've got a great list like this, you can always adjust. So that is this step. I don't know that we need to go any further, but that's why it's an important first step, both from a point of view of accountability, but also from a point of view of resource management. But that is the first step. So you might think about kind of doing this quickly, or at least in a preliminary sense, before you actually approve the set of priorities for the year. I think that would be a good insight to do. Let me move on to the second one, because I think this I think will take some discussion and some good discussion. So the second step of this system is how are you going to monitor and report on progress, right, in this plan? You set out, you got a sense of priority, you've delegated, we know what resources, now we need to do, we want to do. So how often and how does the board and the departments need to kind of monitor what's going on and report on what's going on? So you have the opportunity to flex or raise red flags and fix emerging issues on this. So let me go over a few principles here that make this an important step for you all. First of all, think about, what is the schedule? What is a regular schedule that you would want to report on the progress of this plan? In my mind, and we can talk about it specifically, but it isn't every month. That's a lot of reporting work for things that may not change all that often. We can talk about maybe 3 times a year. We can talk about that in a minute. But there is a regular schedule where everybody knows it's June, it's time to see where we are with these deliverables and have a discussion that we need to have. The second thing, and this is where I think a lot of groups kind of go way overboard, is focus the time you report on those items that need board discussion or further direction from the board, or where there are resource problems, or where the strategy isn't working and we need to change strategy and we need to talk about that. This doesn't have to be report out on everything and every little detail. If things are on track and going well, it can be reflected in a dashboard document. I would rather see you spend the time in the discussion with the board on those things that are having challenges, where we need to stop and discuss. We need to change strategy, or resources are inadequate, or we need clarification or further direction from the board to take the next step with this. That's where this has a lot of value in focusing on where you need discussion. The other thing that I've seen a lot of groups do is to present this information not in a 50-page document, but in a simple, clear, and visual way. I've seen a lot of great dashboards for this. You only got a dozen priorities, right, and other things you may be working on that relate. You can have a 1 or 2 page sort of dashboard where you've got, red, yellow, or green. You got green, things are on track. Yellow, we've got some concerns, we may want to discuss one or two of these items. Red, we've got an issue, we need to have a discussion. The board can see visually in a second where things are, and you can pinpoint where there's red flags, where we need to have discussion, but it's a comfort level to the board on where the rest of it is. And it's the information they need to be, confident and comfortable that things are moving along. And don't forget to celebrate accomplishments. I mean, we always focus on what's not working. And what we need to do for the staff and the board is to focus on what we've done and the impact that we've had and the accomplishments of the plan as much as where you need to stop and pause and rethink. So before we get into this worksheet, I will say that here's where the roles of the partners come into play specifically, and here's where there's a lot of accountability here. The staff to the CAO, CAO to the board, and board to your constituents. That leveling up of accountability really comes into how you do this step. Again, it also, to me, it has a side benefit in if the board is comfortable that they've delegated and they know where this work stands and they know what's going on and you've given them enough information to feel good and they know you're going to bring up issues if there's issues, then the board is not going to spend time doing staff work or committee or work group work. They're going to spend time doing board work because you've made them comfortable that they've got a great understanding of what's going on and they know where the problems are. And they're going to talk about those. So this is, to me, a pretty important piece of the system for a number of different reasons. So if we want to spend just a few minutes on this, we can kind of figure out what works for you in this regard. There isn't only one audience possibly for this reporting. Certainly it is, CEO, department heads to the board. That's an important reporting stream. But there could be other times you want to take what's happening in the plan and report to others, stakeholder groups. I'll just make one up. I mean, would this once a year be great fodder to be part of one of those community forums and really let the community know, here's the kinds of things that we're able to make progress on this year. Here's some of the accomplishments. Here's some of the challenges that we've got that we're still working through, and we love your input. I mean, audience number 2 could be the community. And there may be other audiences that you want to report out on this plan too. But let's focus, for our conversation today, let's focus on the board. So I've got when and how often would you want to do this reporting, by whom, the content, the format, and any other comments. So from the board's perspective, what's your sense of how often as a board you would want to have a touch on where we are with this plan, progress being made, and or any issues? What's your sense of that?
So Jim, I was just plugging into this, just one scenario that we spoke about today. There was a cannabis grant that we got. So I'm just kind of running my head around that.
Mm-hmm.
So for the longest of times, I didn't know how much was left in that budget, where we were spending it. And then today we got a pretty good accounting of that. My constituents have been asking me for a while how much was left. I didn't know. So I think, quarterly would be a good time for me to voice my answer to the audience number 2, maybe the people. And for transparency also, to my constituents on, we'll just say this issue that we're talking about, the grant money for the cannabis department. And a lot of things we do, our grant money, how it's dispersed, how far we're getting with them. So I think it would also, quell a lot of the questions that we get here on the board about what's going on, how much we're spending, what's left, where's it going. For us to know as a board and be able to handle that within our district would be helpful for me.
Okay.
And I think it might expedite some of the angst some of these people may have with me not knowing the answer as a board member
Mm-hmm.
and not being able to report out to them. So I don't want to put any undue, labor on anybody, but maybe quarterly would be good in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can always adjust it. I mean, this is all trial. You're building a system here, which means it's not going to be perfect in year one. You're going to find some things that be less, more, different. So this is just a first blush at what you think.
I wonder if each of the, sorry, Keith.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, I wonder if it's gonna be different, maybe based on what it is that we're talking about and also when we're talking about it, because I feel what Supervisor Gogan is trying to say and wonder if initially, as we launch into, like this isn't a new budget, right? Like it's been going since July, but we're now very clear about it, where cannabis is concerned, maybe initially we might want an update a little bit more often than quarterly, and then maybe as we get comfortable with how things are flowing, it moves to quarterly. Then maybe, as you had suggested, Jim's 3 times a year, what have you, but depending on which priority or deliverable we're discussing, it might be that 6 months is good or annual is good.
That's excellent. It could very well depend on the deliverable. That's great. That's a great way to look at it. And again, it's going to be an experiment this year. I think I would err on the side of more reporting. Again, I love the fact that you're sensitive to the fact that puts an administrative burden on pulling that information together and putting that document together and presenting it. But I think erring on that side at first to see what's a better rhythm is a great idea.
And I think that the other thing for us as board members to consider is that another one of our large deliverables was more transparency and building trust.
Right.
And then in this area in particular, we've got a stretch of road ahead of us in that. And so maybe it will be important, and we're going to have to be sensitive and listen to staff. Again, as you said about the time that it's going to take them to do this, is that really where we want them spending their time? But right now, it is kind of important.
Mm-hmm.
So enough about that, then kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but not, it's.
No, it's really not. I mean, I think this is great discussion. The by whom category, now because this again goes to the board's desire to.
Jim, can we go back?
Yeah, please.
A second, I'm sorry.
Yeah, please.
Why wouldn't, when you do the first page and you're talking about a certain issue that you want, like forming an economic team, why wouldn't at that point part of the plan is then fill in how often you want reports per each item, right?
Yeah.
So So as Jill said, maybe you're going to have different times during the project, but I would think that some projects are real long-term projects, getting the United States Forest Service to cut more trees, that could be a 50-year project, or versus that we have things that we need done in 6 months. So I would think the development of that would all be kind of at the same time where you could change that.
Yeah, and thank you, because what I didn't cover in step 1 was for each of these steps, there are probably likely tools or systems that you would want to put in place to make sure this works well. And one of the tools that usually happens with this is that once a priority gets defined and assigned, then there is whatever you normally do internally. It's a work plan, it's an operating plan, whatever it is. The charge has been given, and there's a sense of how are we going to go about doing this. Specific tasks, certain deadlines, and part of that would be how often should we report to the board on this, and that will not be the same, like you say, perhaps for every priority. So I agree 100% with that, and I'll reflect that here. What should be, though, is you should also then report on sort of the state of the plan in and of itself, realizing there's going to be different information that's needed at different times for different priorities. Where are we with the plan overall, right? So maybe that's a 3 times a year dashboard that gives the board a broad look at the greens, reds, and yellows, and so that you can step back and say, we've got a pattern here. We've got an issue with alignment of resources in this general area. We should stop and talk about that. Because, see, that's the beauty here. The beauty of a system like this is that it helps you identify red flags or trends before they become crises, right? So if you've got a dashboard that you look at maybe 3 times a year, you have the ability to say, how are we doing on our strategic objectives, right? And where do we see we're working well or efficient, and where do we see a red flag that we want to talk about now? In addition to getting specific information on particular priorities when you need it. So I think that's a great point, and I appreciate you making that, Jeremy. Orderly whole plan review status.
I have a consideration also for the board is that maybe there should be a committee or an ad hoc committee formed with 2 supervisors and the CAO and maybe HR that can meet, more often than quarterly for short follow-ups, but then the quarterly meeting is when they can really bring back up to what's heard and share that with the public and the
Yeah, and I think at the end of this, once you get a sense of, I'm sorry?
Oh, go ahead.
I think once you get a sense of all the pieces of this, what would be the next step to kind of put this together and refine it and keep tabs on how it's going and maybe adjust it, is absolutely, that would be a great idea, is to have sort of an internal working group with maybe a BOS member representation kind of saying, how's this going? Are we meeting too much, not enough? Do we have the right information, too much information, just to keep track on this piece until it becomes routine? It is a great suggestion.
So Jim, I have a question on that, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, please.
So with the format I'm bringing up today, just because Ed was here and he talked about it, we had a grant for a few $1 million. The first year we used a lot of it. So would you suggest having...
He can't hear you if you don't hear him.
Would you suggest having more review, or do you see more review coming initially when we're setting something up, because the heavier lifting is done early, and as we see now, it's kind of transitioning over to the county, and then we'll see in the 3rd year that we're only spending maybe a third of what we did in the first year, and we're kind of tailing out of that that grant, we'll say, and it's finite. So just the one we're speaking of now as an example is a 3-year finite kind of grant. So I would think that maybe some of the heavier lifting, and I don't know who decides how often these meetings will be, are done probably in the first half-third of that time frame, and the least of it needs to be done in the last third, and then we report out on the efficacy of how we worked that grant and how it worked out for our community.
I absolutely 100% think that's a fabulous idea, and that's why I think this construct of maybe there's an overview report on how the plan generally and priorities are going, maybe 3 times a year, but then by priority, you determine at the time of assignment and delegation, you determine when the board needs to hear information or status updates. And for that priority, like you just say, it may be very front-loaded in the first quarter or the first 2 quarters of the cycle of working on that, and maybe less later on. So giving yourself the flexibility based on when the board needs information and when the board may have decisions to make. That should guide how often you may want information on a certain thing. So I really like this idea of general plan review, and then just making the decision of reporting based on priority by priority in the assignment phase. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you. My concern was that we would be going 100 miles an hour on everything, when some things only need to be 25 miles an hour, and other things need to be 100, and we're dividing ourselves a little thinly.
Exactly.
In the last third, when the first third of something else is coming up.
Exactly.
And we need to focus most of our time on that.
And that's another reason to do that step before you finally approve the priorities, because what we said was, take a look at what it's going to take to achieve these priorities fully, and part of resources is time, right? So if you do that exercise on page 1, worksheet 1, and you look at that and say, oh my gosh, we have killed ourselves in the first quarter here, this is not sustainable, this is not feasible, let's cut back and do it right and do it well, we can always add a priority later. I mean, if you flip through a number of priorities, there's no reason you have to wait to year 2 to add something. I'm not going to say you're going to do that a lot, but there's no reason you can't add a priority mid-year. So I love the idea of doing that front-load analysis as part of step 1 before you finalize your priorities, because time is a resource.
And as the distance goes, I guess subtraction would be part of that also.
Yep, good comment. So let's just this may be very clear already to you, but let's just pinpoint the rest of these steps. So in this reporting, the by whom is a question. So is this an opportunity where you would, everything flows through Letty, or is this an opportunity where the board can hear from and see and engage with department heads, or is it a combo Letty and department head? So how would you like to see the reporting done? Because it helps you build relationships and be able to see the folks who are doing the work. So is this a department head report with the CAO/department head reporting system? What's your sense of that?
Well, I think if we're talking about a strategic plan as a whole, that would fall to the CAO, and the CAO would be responsible for bringing whatever department head they needed to support that. The way I see it is a strategic plan.
I would like some clarification as well, as Supervisor Brown had suggested creating an ad hoc committee on this as well. Is that something the board wanted to direct staff to do?
I think that would be something that we would do as we went along with, with our each specific deliverable we're looking at. It's like our audience 1 might be ad hoc, and then you might be reporting to them every 2 weeks, where audience 2 would be the board of supervisors, and you might be reporting to them every 2 months. And then, I think that, but there's going to be, have to be broken down farther. But as a whole, I think that the CAO would be the one to report out on the entirety of the plan, because you're going to be the one that's most in direct contact with people actually implementing it, boots on the ground.
Because I was thinking, just as we have a section on the agenda for the cannabis ad hoc, we could create one that's specifically for the strategic plan, where the CAO could report out on any updates on any of the deliverables or priorities.
And I don't know, it seems to me if we're talking at the strategic plan as a whole, it's going to be a little bit more in-depth than just our ad hoc report out. I mean, you're going to have an actual, some numbers and visuals probably to show how things are going. So I wouldn't expect that on every board agenda to have you come up with those numbers.
Right.
So
just a suggestion. I just wanted to, because to me, I appreciate that the board is taking the time to have this completed, because I know it's been a request for quite some time to have a strategic plan on knowing what the board's priorities are. So whatever the board would like, I'm happy to accommodate.
To me, the ad hocs are within the individual asks. So maybe you have an ad hoc on on one of the 12 asks, but in general, if we're well functioning, we really shouldn't have ad hocs with somebody that's sat on an ad hoc for 10 years or whatever. But in a perfect world, staff and the CAO should be able to deal with all these issues And when you need an ad hoc is when you need help or advice or support. And so to me, not all those issues should have a general ad hoc, they should have independent ones.
Right. Yes,
Okay.
because they would involve different department heads. So I understand that.
Right.
I agree with that as well.
Great. Okay, I'll articulate that there. And it is great, again, it facilitates communication and collaboration between departments as well. So we'll kind of talk about the general reporting as the CEO primary, and obviously Letty can bring in department heads as needed. Where there are red flag issues and need for discussion, it'd be great if the department head was there as a support. And then ad hoc groups where needed on particular issues or priorities to facilitate more frequent communication or reporting, so that nothing gets dropped or lost. And those can be instituted just as needed on certain issues. The content and the format, again, my suggestion is that your time is limited. You want to have discussion where discussion is needed, not just reporting. Everybody can read a report. If things are going well, great. But the content of these reports should focus on areas where you need more discussion, further direction. There's resource issues or other red flags that are going to prevent you from hitting the goal, or the strategy isn't working, whatever it is. Really focus your time on those areas that need discussion. And the format, again, I think this lends itself to a visual format pretty easily, at least for the overall progress. You can look at it at a glance and see the pulse of where things are and begin to discover where things are awry, and not just pages and pages of text. So I think once you hone in on that right format, the board will be used to seeing it, the staff will be used to producing it, it'll be that regular kind of at a glance look at where you are. So if you guys have any thoughts about that, but that's what I've seen work best, and to get the most out of a system like this.
Any thoughts? Not seeing a lot of
So I guess one question I have about all this, and I'm kind of seeing how much work a CEO has to do now compared to what I saw prior to Letty coming on board. And knowing that Letty has a shorter amount of time per week to do all these things, and hopefully she stays on forever, but we never know. Initially, should we be trying to gear this towards maybe taking a little bit of the load off and the board, or some of the other people picking up this load so Letty can stay, I don't want to say unburdened, but burdened as least as possible by her constraints with hours that she has to abide by?
Well, let me remind you too, Letty was listed here as the lead on this particular deliverable, but hopefully she will not be listed as the lead on all of these particular priority deliverables. And it would be up to that individual to pull this information together. There will be a system, a format. Again, that's the beauty of the system. It happens, everybody understands it. It happens at certain times. There's templates, there's tools. So maybe in answer to your question, Letty shouldn't be the lead on most of these priorities. It would be somebody else who could take the lead in putting this information together. And that certainly would help. I think if you've got Letty as the lead on all of these things, there's something wrong.
Yeah, I would envision working closely with all department heads that would pertain to each issue or priority, and between that creating their own teams of support for information and movement on each of these. So it's something that I can definitely work with.
Yeah, and I almost think it's a good thing that this may put some of the burden on other folks instead of yourself. Not just for now, but the long term, when we get a kind of
Yeah, it'd be nice to have it structured. Yeah.
It's a little more solid than having everything to yourself.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would envision some team development.
Yeah. which is, this, again, a side benefit of this. But you know what, you guys are bringing up a really important point, and that's why, again, that first worksheet is so critical, because really think through the resources it's going to take to do something, and that's the human factor too: time, capacity, competency, other priorities. And if those dozen priorities seem at the end of the day overwhelming, it's better to reduce that list and do things well and have people have a sense of accomplishment and contribution, rather than trying to do 12 things not well. So that is a consideration also. The internal work that we need to be done to get these things done should be factored in there.
I would like to also add, Jim, and you can comment as well. When we created these core groups, we did invite a lot of department heads, and we had quite a participation of individuals and, well, department heads in particular, that have a strong interest in having this strategic plan grow into reality. So it was really nice to work with that and hear a lot of good discussions on each of these deliverables. So I know we have the buy-in of the department heads, and I really appreciate their time.
Oh yeah, and just they thoroughly enjoyed the cross-department collaborative things. And frankly, there were a few instances where they learned a lot too, because I didn't know we did that, or I didn't know that was available. And I remember a comment that was made about resources that are in a bucket over here that some of the staff were not aware of, and so the beauty of this plan is that it's not a departmental plan, it is a strategic plan, and it forces those connections and collaboration, which absolutely will have side benefits. And it's exciting, more exciting work in some cases. So anyway.
And maybe this will be more, maybe they've been yearning for this and we just didn't know it. Certainly would make me, if I was a department head, feel more valuable if I had more input to what the final answer was. And we do suffer here from, I guess, what I call the dilution kind of deal, where we hire one person to do, well, Susie, for example, last month or 3, we were out without Emma, and it was right in the middle of budgets, and Susie had to do more than she signed up for. And I know that's hard. I'm not saying that she wasn't great on both sides, but it's almost impossible if you split your job in half to do both things as competently as you can do one. So, the more input that we get from the department heads, the better that we make them feel about their job. And maybe they've been wanting this. Maybe this is just something that hasn't been brought to light prior to today or Letty taking over. But I think this could be, something beneficial to all the department heads in getting things done.
Yeah, certainly is a side benefit of a process like this. The other thing that's valuable here is that, when you're working in your department and so concentrating on your function and getting things done, you sort of miss the understanding of the bigger connection. I know I'm doing this, but how does it connect up to a broader goal that the whole county owns and we all want to accomplish together? It's that sense of being part of a bigger picture and a bigger set of accomplishments than just what I can manage in my own department. So that is a bit of a fuzzy benefit, but it is a tangible benefit when you're looking at growing leadership from within. Because the more a department head can see the bigger picture and the connection and the bigger goals, you're developing leadership perspectives and abilities there. And so it definitely has a side benefit for that as well. So I'm thrilled to hear you guys talk about it that way. All right, let me go down to one that is really I'm going to try not to be as overwhelming and negative on this one, but I have a lot of experience with groups kind of tackling this stage of the process, and I've seen a lot where it can go wrong. And so I just want to put some things on the table about measurement. So measurement is different than monitoring. Monitoring is, did we do it or did we not do it? Are we making progress? Are we here when we wanted to be there? Check, check, check. Measurement is all about, but were we successful? So we can do a lot of things, but did they result in the milestones, the outcomes? Did we change what we wanted to change? Did we make things better which is what the milestones reflect, those outcomes. To do that, you've really got to measure things. And so there's a couple of things here. I just want to lay some parameters on the table and be very open and direct with you about what I've seen in this area and where I think you should start in this area. This is tricky. And there's a lot of pitfalls when it comes to measuring things. A couple of which are not being clear at the onset what it is you're actually trying to measure. And so as a result, you start to measure a lot of things, thinking that that information is going to tell you whether you've been successful in achieving a certain goal, when in point of fact, it has little to do with success. So you spend a lot of time and energy and effort gathering data and measuring things, and it's kind of off the mark at what it is we're actually trying to measure. That's a big pitfall in this. The second pitfall I've seen, and I'll just be very blunt about it, is that I've seen some staffs do a lot of it. It's an administrative effort to track things, put data together, analyze it, report on it. There's a lot of administrative work that goes into that, and a lot of great work that goes into that potentially. And sometimes that stuff is presented to a board, and they look at it and go, that's interesting, that's great, but they don't really use it as part of decision making. It's like, that's great, you know, so all that time and effort, it's done because it helps you understand if you're successful and make changes and really make better decisions. So if you don't use the measurement information, it's been a bit of a waste. So there's a couple of pitfalls here. So what I've got on this worksheet is just some background information about what makes a good measure and what is a good process to think about coming up with measures, right? So, you know, and you can read, I don't need to go through this with you, but basically the measurement process is first a conversation about what success looks like. So we have issue X, we have milestone Y, and the milestone talks about this outcome we want, this result we want. Well, to have a sense of what the right measure is, you really need to talk about what that looks like. What does success look like in achieving this milestone? It's a very important conversation, particularly with issues that are not quantifiable, to come up with the right measure to talk about. So what does success look like? What is the best measure we can use to tell if we've been successful? And that's a very important conversation. And then how do we go about gathering it and reporting on it and that kind of thing. So I thought the best thing to do here would be to give you some examples. So you can just see the horniness of this step and really what it takes to do it well. And then I'll suggest sort of how you might want to proceed. But I just pulled, and on the screen you'll see, I just pulled 2 of your milestones in areas that were priorities, right? So these are things you're going to want to measure, right? But I pulled them because they're very, very different in what measures would work, right? So the first one is from the small business development issue. And the milestone was, or is, working with community partners, Trinity County has assessed opportunities for small business development and provides targeted programs and resources to stimulate growth. Okay? Great milestone. This is what we want to do. This is the outcome we want to achieve in this area of small business development. So obviously you'd have a conversation about what that looks like successfully. You know, what would happen if we were successful in this area? What specifically are we hoping we'll see, or what will change? But what is it you're really trying to measure here? And it's a very important question. So I read that statement and I see really 3 things. One, you're trying to measure whether you effectively assessed opportunities. That's in here. 2, you're trying to measure whether you've actually provided targeted programs and resources. And 3, you're trying to measure it, did it stimulate growth, right? So what are the best measures here? And again, this is not I mean, you guys would come up with the best measures, but I look at the first 2 and I say, did we assess opportunities? I can pretty much tell whether we assessed opportunities. We sat down, we had a process, we brought in expertise, we did that, okay? We can measure that, we did that. Did we develop targeted programs and resources? That's pretty quantifiable too. I mean, we have a new program that's coming online. We've got tools and templates for small businesses to use or prospective small businesses to use. We did that, right? We were successful. Did we stimulate growth? Okay, that's another question, right? But I think it's still pretty quantifiable. You can kind of quantify growth, and you'll have to decide, is it the number of new businesses? Is it tax revenue? What is a quantifiable way that we can decide we stimulated growth, right? What do we mean by that, and what do we want to track, right? So that one generally, I won't say it's easy, but it's fairly clear on what you're trying to measure and what best measures you could use, right, to assess your success. The second one is not that clear, and this is where measurement can get very tricky. So the second one I pulled was from the legal cannabis industry issue. The milestone was legal cannabis is a fully functioning and compliant industry that reflects and supports the heritage and lifestyle of the county. Great objective. That resonates, right? So it's not that it's a bad objective. It's that it's going to be challenging to measure and will require a different approach to measurement because there's so many parts of this milestone that you have to define. So first of all, the conversation about what success looks like is going to be a really important conversation to have on this milestone because it's going to help you decide what it is you're trying to measure. So that's a really important conversation I would not skip. But what are we trying to measure? Well, for me to tell you what you're trying to measure, you have to define some things first.
Jim, can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yeah, please.
So, in my mind, heritage and lifestyle of the county is unmeasurable. To every individual, it's a different thing.
Okay.
Heritage to me, lifestyle to me could be different than it is to Dan or Jill or anybody. So to try to get a measurement on that to be compatible for the county, I just find it to be an undoable sentence.
Oh, okay. The other thing too is, I mean, yes, it could be very different things to different people, but you as a board have defined a vision for the county, for instance, and in that vision, it says that we are a safe, vibrant, small-town community where individuals and families and businesses can thrive and is recognized as a premier destination for those seeking outdoor adventure and a restorative qualities of the natural environment. So, yes, how I define my lifestyle in Trinity County may be different than you do, but you've got some bigger concepts here that you believe define an evolved county. So whereas heritage and lifestyle is very individualistic, you've got a set of values and a vision for the county that do put some concepts on the table that you believe in that could be used at a high level. Or you may say, you know what, this is not the right milestone. We need to put a period after industry. Period. That's what we control. Okay? That's your decision.
I think the heritage and lifestyle is vastly different between districts even. I think if you asked the community of District 2 and District 5 what they would think about heritage and lifestyle, you would probably come up with totally different answers.
Okay.
So being as vast as they are, I think that's a really blanket kind of unanswerable question there. So maybe we should stop at industry.
Yeah, you could. And what's wonderful about that is it's in the conversation about measures that you realize that, right? So it's a great conversation because it's going to tell you, do we have an objective that we could spend years trying to define and it's undefinable. And if so, we need to amend it. We need to amend the milestone, right? But let's say you take that phrase out, under the guise of just running an example with you, take that phrase out. You still have to define what fully functioning is. And you still have to define in your mind what compliant is. What does that look like, right? So if you do, let's say you do that, that'll give you some clues as to what you're trying to measure, but what the best measure would be. In my mind, some of this may be very quantifiable, but you may realize that some of these measures are not quantifiable. They're qualitative, right? They require certain touchbacks with certain constituents to see how they're viewing things, how they're feeling, how they perceive things, and that's tracked over time as to whether you're making progress on something. But that's what I'm saying. Not everything is a number. Not everything is a stat or a trend. Sometimes it's a qualitative measure. But you really have to go through this conversation to find out what is the best way the board and the staff are going to be able to understand if we're successful. And
You're
that's
trying to outline that right now?
No, I'm giving you an example of the process.
Okay.
And and let me go right to my suggestion, because you can see that there's a lot involved in this. And it takes a lot to track a number of measures, right? So my suggestion to you on this one is that you don't start with a lot of measures. You pick one or two that you want to dip your toe in the water, that you think is maybe most important to measure and report out on. And you go through this process and you come up with what you think the measure you're trying to measure. You come up with the measure and you start. You gather the data, you talk about it, you see what the results are. One or two. The other thing I would suggest is that you may already have measures that you're already using. So don't reinvent the wheel. Pull out the measures you already got and work with those. The point is, start small. This is a potential way to trip up. This is not an easy business. There's an art and a science to this. I would start small, use measures you already have, work with those. Once you get that under your belt, you're feeling comfortable, add another one, and then the report out on these is generally once a year. I mean, generally you kind of do this as part of a plan update where you can see where you've gotten to and whether you need to keep working on something. It's a once a year kind of report out and discussion as part of your plan update process. But I caution you to start judiciously here and maybe start with things you already track. So let me stop there and just open it up to any thoughts or comments about this particular part of the system.
Right. I know this is not exactly what you were looking for, but to Liam's discussion on the heritage, we do have that defined in Resolution 2016-077, which is the 4 principles of local regulation on cannabis. So where we describe what we feel the heritage and lifestyle of the county compared to cannabis is. So that's just a note to put in the back of your head for the future. On an overall question on the whole thing, your layout, which I like, moves us as a county forward, definitely. But I've asked this question before, and I don't think I've ever gotten a good answer. So this is great. Letty, we tell Letty to follow this, and she goes to her HR director, and Letty tells them, this is the new format we're going to follow, and everybody's on board. And then we have 3 electeds or 4 electeds in department heads?
I think we have 6.
6
5 or 6. Clerk recorder, auditor, DA, sheriff, trash tax. There's 5.
Okay, so we have 5 that can tell us to go pound sand. And that they'll give us the information any darn well way they want. And it doesn't really matter if it's only 1, and I'm not saying any of ours would, but how do we figure that into all of this? I mean, we're relying on the CAO's persuasiveness to get everybody on board. I will say my time here, I can name a couple that would not do this just because they were told that this is what we're doing. So what's the strategy for that, Jim?
Oh, was this my question or a question to everyone?
Well, it's, I mean, you've obviously come across this before, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. You hit on a very, especially in a public entity like yourself, where you've got certain parameters and authorities and lines of reporting that are pretty clear. My sense of this is that you've got to start where you are, right? There's value in starting something like this and building the system and making it work, even if it isn't 100%. I think what happens with the others who don't have to play along, if they see the efficiency of it, if they see the board having, great discussion based on the information in this format, if they see that the board is using this to measure success, if it isn't so burdensome of a system that it can be implemented fairly easily, and that's again in this area, reason I wouldn't start with a dozen measures. I think it's a matter of proving that the system improves decision-making in the information flow and communication, and when somebody doesn't use it, then it's obvious, and you may be able to do nothing about that, but I think you have to start where you are, and don't wait for it to be perfect, and move on it, and get something that works for you most of the time, and realize that hopefully people will see, well, this can work, and it isn't burdensome, and the board seems to like this format, and I don't have to, report 1,600 times. I can do it this way, and it's much more efficient. Then hopefully others will kind of join the bandwagon. And of course, Letty can use her persuasive powers, but if that doesn't work, in my mind, you start where you are, and you prove its worth. May not be the answer you want to hear, but I don't. No, it isn't a reason not to embrace a system and go with it.
Okay, thank you.
Can I jump in for just 1 second?
Right.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So I need to jump off this meeting, and I want to apologize for that, but I'm in Oregon because I have some family issues that I have to take care of, and so I need to go. I will listen to the rest of this meeting. Jim, I really appreciate your guidance through this and what you're saying. I have support of this document, and so I just wanted to make that clear why I'm jumping off.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, well, thanks for being here while you could.
All right, so Dan, really there's just one more piece of this. So I know it's 12 o'clock, but I literally have just one more piece if you want to keep going.
Yeah, let's get it done.
Okay. So I'm going to put this down, and I'm going to put up worksheet 4, which is the last piece, and then just some concluding remarks here. Let me find worksheet 4. So worksheet 4 was sort of a legal size piece. And basically, the point here is that a strategic plan is a living, breathing, changeable, fluid document. You set out with some analysis you've done, you set out with identification of issues and goals you want to pursue, but life happens, the environment changes, and hopefully through this system of reporting and monitoring, et cetera, that you're able to flex and move. But the last decision to make is the updating piece. This also needs to be an evergreen document that every year rolls to, based on your progress, based on what's happening in the environment, it rolls to your next set of priorities, or you carry over priorities and you add only 1 or 2, but it needs to be that rolling, responsive plan that you refresh. So on an annual basis, the process is very different than what we went through here. On an annual basis, it's a check-in on anything that's changed in your broader environment, in the community, in the county, both internally and externally. It's checking progress ultimately on your priorities. It's adjusting if you need to adjust any of the milestones because they've been accomplished or they're too challenging, then you do that then. And then you set your priorities for the next year. It's that rolling sense of what have we been working on? How far did we get? What's most important? What's our next set of priorities? So that's an annual iterative process. Every 3 years, because remember this plan also has a 3-year horizon, every 3 years the process is a little bit more involved because you're going to want to reset your issues and all of your milestones. and set that next set of 3-year outcomes, right? So you've got a midterm horizon that you work toward, you've got that annual churn that gives you flexibility to focus and keep direction toward that. And then, of course, your framework is very long-term, your mission, your vision, your long-term goals. Yeah, it's useful to look at that maybe every 7 to 10 years, but that's your sort of long-term foundation. So this is a very rolling, iterative process that keeps it fresh and relevant, right? So one of the things you have to decide, or the last piece of this process, is decide what your cycle is. What is your planning cycle? By that I mean is, when do we do that annual step of resetting priorities, seeing where we got to in resetting priorities? When is that best done in our calendar, right? When should we have the quarterly reports in the monitoring process? When is that best done in our calendar? When should we look at measures, and when should we do the update process? And so, very simply put, the planning cycle is basically the schedule of when you do the steps of the planning process so that the plan drives focus, action, and resources and priorities. And that's all about timing, right? So what I have here is, it's not complete, but what I have here, and I checked in with Letty on some of this, planning happens in a bigger context of governance work, right? You've got certain times you do budgets. Well, ideally, the decisions you make in the plan should be done in a timely way so that they can drive part of the budget. Why develop a plan that happens after the budget? That doesn't make any sense, right? So you've got the budget process that ongoing, and I've tried to reflect that here. When your fiscal year begins, you've got when the board turns over. That's an important piece of this, right? New leaders come on, old leaders go off. When does that happen? And when should we be doing this planning process? So I've got that listed here. And I'm sure there's other things that I'm missing. But you want to put this into a bigger context of when certain things happen so that you can plan in the right time frame that the plan actually drives the work. So the decision you would make here, for instance, is what is the time of year that we should be updating the plan? So if you do that annually, where you look at the big picture, where you've gotten to, and you think about next year's priority, you do your quick environmental scan, you set your next year's priorities. When should that happen, ideally, so that the plan informs the budget and informs the other work, right? So that's kind of the first thing you want to decide. And then what falls from that is, then if we're going to report quarterly, then we know the months that is. When are we going to measure everything? Probably a plan update time. So then the rest of it kind of falls pretty easily. But let me ask you, if the plan drives the work, or should in part drive the work, when would this annual plan update process ideally happen? Just put that question on the table and see what you guys think.
So Letty, can I ask maybe a legal question, I'm not sure. It seems odd to me, and I'm sure I'll find myself in this situation sometime, where I have been voted out, as Jeremy and Keith have been.
Use your mic, please.
And we have one of the people here now who's been active, and obviously Keith has a lot of heritage, we'll say, in the last 3.5 years of his board service. Is there any way to start folding in Rick, Heidi into this? I mean, basically, Jeremy and Keith have 4 months left, of which 2, holidays are kind of slow in government. And Rick and Heidi have 4+ years left. And nothing against Keith or Jeremy, obviously they have most of the people in their district behind them, and they would be maybe, I don't want to say better, because maybe more influence on what should happen in their district because of their way of thinking and their winning of the election. And I may be in that position too, so I'm not putting Jeremy or Keith. I'm going to lose someday, and I will be that person also.
Yeah, I would have to check with county council on their ability to participate. They could possibly be able to participate voluntarily until they are sworn in into office. But again, it's also going to depend on the board after today on how you want to direct staff to moving on some of these
you know,
items, so.
I certainly mean just suggestions, not voting or anything like that.
Right,
Just
right,
suggestions,
just
just
gathering
input.
information
Just
and,
input,
exactly.
Which I think would be helpful.
And this meeting is open to the public, so both Rick and Heidi could have been at this meeting and weighed in if they felt it was of value to them.
I will tell you though, I think that is a great idea, and I know, I work with obviously a lot of different types of entities, not all public entities. I know public entities, you've got some restraints that are very important to abide by, and you should ask legal counsel. But I will tell you, it is best practice in other kinds of organizations like, nonprofit, trade, professional societies, whatever, that once those incoming leaders are identified, no, they're not officially seated and they don't have voting, but they are brought right into this process because the plan that's being developed is going to be their plan to implement. And so the sooner they have not only a sense of it and understand it, but a way to help with other voices shape it, the better. So yes, I understand you have constraints, but it is best practice in a lot of other organizations to try to do that. That way the transitions aren't so jagged, they're more fluid, right? They're more because people have been engaged and they understand the plan and they can hit the ground running when they're seated and they feel they own it. They've had a chance to help shape it. So I understand your parameters, but it is a fabulous idea if you could work around that somehow to make those transitions and the planning process just seamless rather than very jagged that it can be.
So I will point out that the problematic side of this is that we started this process 2.25 years ago.
Yes.
And one of the reasons that we stopped was there was going to be a transition to this board. And so you're always playing catch up.
Right.
We are the supervisors that are sitting at this time to try to fit this. I mean, my recommendation to anybody, and especially to an incoming supervisor, is to make your feelings known either public process or to the outgoing supervisor and have those in. That's kind of the process that's designed to work. And so obviously if there's something that is an incoming supervisor is vehemently against, that's going to cause problems in the long term, but then they have their turn during the update to do this.
Right.
So
yeah.
I was sincerely disappointed that we didn't do this 2 years ago. Then we would be looking at what's the plan to do our second 3-year.
Yep.
Yep. I really caution against just always waiting for the next one to come in.
I agree.
So my thought on that was, no matter what I would have brought forward to the person who I beat, they would have never brought it forward, whether it was the best idea in the world or not. And in the transition of someone saying to Lee, they do this, or Keith, this is what I think, yeah, that's kind of hopeful that the loser and the winner are going to see eye to eye. And it'd be great if it really happened in real life, but I just don't think that happens. And I don't want to say, I think Keith is overreaching on how far I think that this should go, but it's always kind of shocking that the winner sits on the outside for 6 months after winning. Sorry. And I mean, they have a say, sure, they have the same say as the public, but they don't see all the things that we see, and they have won, they haven't voted in. Voting, certainly not, but until they're actually in. So I would like to give the person with 4 years coming a little bit.
4.5?
4.5, not 4.5, no, but just a little bit more, a running start instead of just starting on day one, just more insight.
I think that some of this discussion you could have with your planning cycle calendar, which we're discussing.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, we could plan these updates to start in February. Then we'd have new board members on board. As of right now, I think we need to plow ahead as much as we can with this and try to get something established so we can move forward, because we're already halfway through our term and we haven't got this part done yet. So I think that I do understand kind of where Liam's coming from. I think that we can address that by just saying, right, when we do these updates, we're gonna do them at the beginning of the year, and it's gonna be every 2 years. We have the potential of having new supervisors come on for that. So other than that, I mean, I don't think there's anything else we can do. We have an elected board until December, and then we'll have a new elected board in January.
Well, the other thing, I can tell you what some other groups do. One other thing you could do, I mean, as part of the update process, there is a bit of information gathering and input gathering, right? You're not going to do it as extensively as we did at the beginning of this process 2.5 years ago, but you are going to do a little bit of a process to see how we're doing, where are we. There's no reason why one of those input groups couldn't be past and incoming leaders. You know, couldn't be an input group that could at least feel that they've got their thoughts or ideas, whether they agree with anybody or not. It really doesn't matter. They're an input group, and it's part of the data that you guys use to freshly update the plan. So that's a way to handle it in and around your regulations. But again, I agree that everybody has a chance to participate now. But the goal is to make this as seamlessly as possible from one plan to the next. And to not have somebody coming on new feel like, my God, what is this? I've never seen this. I don't know what this is. It's going to take me 3 months to get revved up. I mean, you want to avoid that. You want me as a new council member to be able to hit the ground running as soon as possible. And some of the things you're talking about now would help me do that. So that being said, when should this plan update? This is not the monitoring, not the reporting, but when should you be having the discussion annually to look at where you've gotten to, maybe look at the measures, do this quick environmental scan, and reset priorities for the next year, and do it in time to still influence possibly what you need in the budget. So you can't do it too early because you don't have enough progress information on the current plan, but you can't do it too late or you miss the budget impact. So is it a summer thing? And Letty, you can tell me, the budget process goes on for a while. I mean, you start early and then it eventually gets approved in September. But at what point can you still influence what the priorities might be in the coming year? At what point can that still influence the budget?
Hello there. Yeah, my suggestion would be February, March, early in the year. That way, we do have time to get past the holidays, but before crazy stuff starts in April, that we would have an opportunity to do it.
Yeah, for the board members, some of you may be aware of it, but just a refresher. Budget development packets typically go out to department heads and their fiscal staff in April. So that's when they start developing their requested budgets. And those are usually due back to admin in May. Then after May is when admin starts reviewing budgets and start making cuts to balance the budget. So I would agree that February or March is probably the best time to be doing plan reviews.
Yeah.
So that way that department heads have a chance to build any changes into their requested budget.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then monitoring. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so it would be developed, approved, and then the monitoring piece. If you look at, and this isn't the issue by issue monitoring, the priority by priority monitoring, but the broader, what is that 3 times a year? We're going to step back and look at the whole. Then if you looked at that, you would say then that could be what, June 1, 2, 3, June or July might be the first one, 1, 2, 3, October, November, or maybe June, September, January, or something like that would be your monitoring times. Just kind of taking every 3 months and doing your big step back. something like that. I mean, we can look at this again, but.
Adopted until now, so.
Well, this year, right, and so realize that this year is going to be a weird year. This is sort of the ideal cycle, and it could take you a year or more to kind of get on this cycle. The first year is always problematic because you're not doing it ideally. You're going to have to kind of gerrymander things a little bit. So this year you may only do kind of one reporting, and the plan update in March may be very minor because you're just now kind of getting things rolling. So to get yourself on schedule, you either decide we're not going to update the plan for 18 months or until March of 2024, and we're just going to let this plan ride for more than a year. Or we're going to do a short update in March just to get us on the right schedule. So the first year is going to be weird regardless because you're building a new system here.
A couple of things. I think your major review would be best on a in the half term. So you have
September.
You have 2 board members with a 1-year experience, and this would be minimums, and 3 would be 3 years experience, and then everybody's kind of comfortable. So if you're really looking at dramatic change, I think that would be the time to do that. Another question for you is, does anybody do it actually not based on calendar but by performance? And I mean that in the sense that, so we have 12 goals. When we've accomplished 6, do we now say, okay, now's the time to set up another 12 goals?
Oh, well, I think you have the ability to do that because you're monitoring it a couple of times a year. Some things are going to go faster, or you're going to reach that accomplishment much quicker than you thought you would, and some things are going to be exactly the opposite. So those monitoring times are also times to adjust. It isn't just monitoring, but it's adjust if needed. So let's say you set out the year with 5 critical priorities, 3 of them go very well and you're feeling pretty good about having accomplished most of what you needed, you could add another priority in September. It's just March gives you that step back time to say, big picture, where did we get to? What problems did we encounter? You're going to do your measurements at that time so you can look at success. And that's the time to say, all right, we had 6 priorities for this year. We're still working on 3, so let's carry those over and let's only set 3 more. Or the opposite. We accomplished all 6. Let's set 6 more. Or there's a couple of low-hanging fruits over here. Let's have 8 more and include the low-hanging fruit. Totally up to you, your capacity, progress, opportunities that arise that you want to take advantage of. But it doesn't have to happen just once a year. It can happen anytime you monitor the plan. And that's where somebody made the comment, it was either Liam or Keith early on, where's the fluidity in this? Well, it isn't just fluid once a year. Your world doesn't change once a year. It changes all the time. So that's why you want to have these monitoring hits to give you that flexibility. So yes, performance, absolutely.
All right.
So Jim, I have a question.
Yeah.
So if we're moving forward on this, today, I'm looking at it from a team development perspective, because it seems to me identifying when to create those teams would be helpful to the CAO, so we can meet those target months. If that makes sense? So I'm just wondering if we need to include that in that schedule, or is there something that me as the intern would just do on my own?
Well, I think you brought it up. Let me put this up here, and we can certainly, I put it into editing view, Letty, so we can talk about this.
Okay.
I know this is, thinking about a brand new system with all these components is a bit, can be and is a bit overwhelming because you're really kind of turning the ship a little bit. You've got a new plan. You also have to think about implementation. So again, I would say It's not going to be perfect in the first year, but 5 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, it's going to be the way you do things, and it's going to be more efficient, and the board's going to have better information, the staff will be more engaged, you'll start to see the benefits of this. So what are the actual next steps? To me, I think I can certainly clean up the comments that we got as we went through this and get that back to you, Letty, for sure. There's a few changes in the plan that we need to make. The resource assessment does need to be done. So you really do need to take those priorities and work that first worksheet to make sure that you can actually want to implement all 12. That may reduce to 8 or less. Do that first. And then at some point, obviously you may want to have an internal work group with maybe a BOS representative to hammer out the implementation plan that we started today. Hammer out something that you can give back to the board to say, okay, we talked about it today, we gave this our best thought, here's a draft of an implementation system that we think would work. Board, look at it, discuss it, and then approve it as well as approve the plan. So I think that first internal work group needs to focus on getting this implementation system cleaned up and something you can recommend to the board for approval. Along with the plan, obviously. And then, I think then, you're going to want to think about, okay, now we have an implementation system, does it require these ad hoc groups? And if so, that would be the time to kind of set those up based on what you decide, how you want to track each of those priorities, because as we said, that could be different, one priority to the other. And then realize you're going to be adjusting this system for at least a year. You're going to find some things that work great, some things that don't. Timing may need to be adjusted, the format of reporting may need to be adjusted. Just expect it, realize that that's building any new system, that's part of it. But keep your eye on the end goal that it will be an efficient, effective way for you to focus on your planning decisions and get good information to the board for the future. So I'll stop there. And Letty, I certainly can talk to you further about the intricacies of that. But let me get you the write-up from today, and then if you have questions after that, I can certainly give you any thoughts that I may have.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's it, Dan. 2.5 years, here's where we are.
All right.
Final session.
All right, well, thank you, sir. And do you have enough, do you have the direction you were asking for?
Yeah, I'll take this and clean it up. From what we talked about, at least you've got the start of the system, and then, Letty and internally, and maybe one of you can serve on that group to take it the next step. Yeah, I do, thank you.
All right, well, thank you. And question, because we're not taking action on this item, is public comment. Do we open
Probably
public
should
comment?
open it up for public comment just to be safe, because it's not a presentation.
Yeah, so that was just a question I had, because there's no action, but we will open the public comment on item 1.2 anyway, if anybody would care to comment.
I see no movement in the room. I have no raised hands and no new chats.
Okay, well, then with that,
I do, question, so this is going to come back for a final vote
yes.
in that date?
It depends when I get it from Jim and,
So,
yeah.
but we.
I don't have a lot to clean up. I can turn this around in a couple days, Letty.
okay. So the
Okay.
18th is our next board meeting, Jim. So we would need it by the 10th or 11th.
Yeah.
10th is
But
our
you guys
holiday.
have some work to do. You guys have some work to do on it, though. If you want to flesh out the implementation system, do the resource assessment, that will probably take you a little bit of time before you want to put it before the board for a vote. You're going to want to do that little assessment piece. So maybe the next.
We're going to be looking at November.
Okay. I do want to, these sort of things have been done before, and we have a habit in this county of just kind of putting things on a shelf. I think that it's super important that everybody be on board and be willing to follow up and hold everybody accountable to keep this thing going. Or we just walk away and say, well, that was an interesting exercise. So I think that's something that we really have to consider, that this is a commitment, not for this board or the next board, but for the future. So that's the end of my soapbox.
All right. Any other soapboxes before I adjourn? All right, with that, we're adjourned.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Susan, I got a couple questions for you.